You walk into the room and it feels settled, not lively, not tense, just settled. The kind of place where everything already has its place. Soft light fills the space without drawing attention to itself. Voices overlap at a low level. Conversations move slowly, comfortably, like they have nowhere urgent to go. People are spread out naturally. Some stand close together, some sit and listen. Small gestures pass between them without effort. A nod, a brief smile, a quiet laugh that appears and disappears. The room feels social in the way familiar places do. Nothing has to be explained. At first, everything seems normal. Then you notice how reactions move. Someone speaks and others respond almost automatically. Words are followed by expressions. Faces shift. Bodies lean in or away. Emotion travels lightly, passed back and forth in small pieces. This is how rooms usually work. This is how people stay connected without thinking about it. And then there is one person who does not take part in that exchange. They are not distant. They are not uncomfortable. They do not stand at the edge or look for an exit. They are right there, inside the room, listening when spoken to, looking directly at whoever is talking. Their presence does not break the flow, but it does not add to it either. A comment lands nearby. It is not important, just something meant to keep things moving. Others respond in small ways, a smile, a sound of agreement. The cold one does nothing. Their face does not shift. Their posture does not change. There is no delay and no reaction. It is as if the comment never reached them. At first, this feels easy to ignore. Then it happens again. A light joke passes through the group. A few people react without thinking. Someone glances around, checking who noticed. The cold one remains the same. Not offended, not amused, not politely engaged, just still. Slowly, the room begins to adjust, not consciously, not all at once. Someone fills the silence with extra words. Another person explains their point longer than needed. A voice softens for no clear reason. A story loses its ending halfway through. Nothing is said out loud. No one calls attention to it. But something shifts. The cold one does not create tension. They do not challenge anyone. They do not reject what is happening. They simply do not respond in the way people expect. And without resistance, that absence starts to shape the space. People begin choosing words more carefully. Emotional details are trimmed down. Reactions become smaller. Some people speak more than before. Some withdraw a little. The room stays polite, calm, controlled. The cold one remains unchanged. Time feels slightly different near them. Pauses stretch. Silence feels heavier than it should. When someone shares something personal, the room waits for a signal that never comes. The moment passes without landing anywhere. Nothing goes wrong. No argument starts. No rule is broken. But something essential does not arrive. The room continues, but it feels flatter, less responsive, as if one part of the circuit is missing. And even if no one can name it yet, everyone feels that the space is slowly reorganizing itself around someone who does not react. This is where attention turns away from the room and toward what is missing inside the person. Not what they show, but what never appears. Jung would not ask why someone is so calm. He would ask what had to disappear for that calm to exist. Emotional absence does not look dramatic. It does not look broken. It often looks clean, quiet, controlled. The cold one listens, understands the situation, and responds when needed. But the response never carries feeling. No warmth rises on its own. No irritation leaks out. No concern shows itself without being forced. Jung would notice that this absence is consistent. It does not change with the topic. A neutral comment and a personal story receive the same flat response. A moment that should pull emotion forward does not reach the surface. Something inside stays closed no matter what touches it. This usually does not begin in adulthood. Jung would look backward. He would assume that at some point emotion became unsafe. Maybe it caused trouble. Maybe it was ignored. Maybe it made the person vulnerable in a place where vulnerability had a cost. Slowly, the inner world learned a rule. Feeling is risky. Showing it is worse. So the feelings were pushed down, not destroyed, just moved out of sight. Jung called this the shadow, not something evil, but something hidden, parts of the self that were not allowed to stay visible: anger, need, sadness, even joy. Over time, the person learns to live without touching these parts. They still exist, but they no longer guide behavior. The cold one may believe they are simply calm by nature, rational, stable. From the inside, it feels normal. Silence feels like balance. Distance feels like safety. They do not feel tense or conflicted. They feel flat, and flat feels reliable. Others experience it differently. People around them begin to feel uncertain. They look for signs that never arrive. A reaction that would tell them they were heard. A shift that would confirm connection. Without it, they start filling the space themselves. They explain more. They soften their words. They question their own reactions. Jung would notice how this absence affects the whole system. One person disconnects from their inner signals, and others begin carrying the emotional weight for them. The room works harder to compensate for what is missing. The cold one does not intend this. They are not withholding on purpose. They are not observing from a place of superiority. They simply no longer have access to the emotional language others are using. The signal does not register strongly enough to trigger a response. This is why emotional absence can last so long. It does not cause obvious damage right away. It creates distance instead of conflict, confusion instead of pain. People adjust rather than confront. Jung would say the shadow does not stay quiet forever. What is pushed away does not vanish. It waits. But for now, in this moment, the cold one appears composed, controlled, unmoved. And the most important thing is not what they feel. It is what they no longer feel at all. This is where the story changes. The cold one is no longer just someone who feels little. They become someone who sounds right. In spaces where clarity is valued, their stillness begins to look like strength. Nietzsche would listen closely here, not to facts, but to tone, to the quiet certainty that enters the room when emotion stays out of the way. He would notice how calm starts to carry moral weight. The cold one speaks without heat. Their words are measured, clean. They do not rush to explain themselves, and they do not apologize for how they sound. What they say feels reasonable, balanced, hard to argue with. Others begin to look less certain next to this. When someone shows frustration, it feels excessive. When someone cares too much, it feels messy. Without saying it out loud, a scale appears. Some reactions look good, others look unnecessary. Nietzsche would recognize this move immediately. Morality does not always arrive through rules. Sometimes it arrives through tone, through the quiet idea that control is better than feeling, that distance is maturity, that calm equals truth. The cold one never claims to be superior. They don't need to. Their stillness does that work for them. They frame decisions as practical, necessary, objective. Emotional responses are not attacked. They are simply made irrelevant. This is how justification forms. Not through argument, but through contrast. When concerns are raised, the cold one listens, then responds with logic. They do not dismiss, they reframe. The emotional weight of the concern disappears inside language that sounds fair. The outcome stays the same. Nietzsche would watch how this reshapes the group. People start preparing their words before speaking. Feelings are translated into neutral terms. Urgency is softened. Some topics stop being brought up at all. Over time, the cold one becomes a reference point. Not officially, quietly. Others check themselves against that calm. Am I being too emotional? Am I overreacting? The standard shifts without discussion. Nietzsche would not accuse the cold one of lying. He would notice how stories about being reasonable protect a certain position, how morality can act as a shield, how being right becomes more important than being honest about impact. Nothing dramatic happens, no rule is broken. But the space changes. Emotional expression begins to feel inappropriate. Calm becomes virtue. Distance becomes proof of insight. And the cold one, without raising their voice or forcing agreement, begins to define what is acceptable. Not because they are right, but because they sound like they are. Now the focus narrows. Fewer people, less noise, a private space, a one-on-one exchange where reactions matter more than words. In places like this, power does not announce itself. It shows up in who moves first. Machiavelli would stop listening to intentions here. He would watch results. Who adjusts, who waits, who fills the silence when nothing comes back. The cold one does not rush. They do not interrupt. They do not soften pauses. When the other person speaks, the cold one listens without giving much away. No nods, no reassurance, no emotional signal to guide the moment. Silence stretches. The other person speaks again. They add detail. They explain themselves more clearly. They check their tone. Not because they were asked to, but because the lack of response creates pressure. Something feels unfinished, and they try to close it. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. The person who reacts less often gains advantage. Not through force, through restraint. When one side stays still, the other side moves. The cold one does not need to push for anything. They do not argue. They do not demand. Their absence of reaction shifts the balance on its own. Decisions tilt quietly. Compromises appear early. Emotional labor slides to one side. In relationships, this can look like strength, calm, stability. The cold one appears unshaken, reliable. The other person begins adjusting around that stillness, trying to keep connection alive. Machiavelli would note that power does not require intention. It only requires outcome. Whether the cold one means to use this advantage or not, the effect is the same. One person adapts, one remains unchanged. Over time, this pattern settles in. Conversations take a familiar shape. One speaks carefully, one listens without reacting, one carries uncertainty, one does not. Nothing dramatic happens, no threats, no confrontation. The shift is quiet, almost polite, but it is real. The cold one gains influence without asking for it. The other person loses ground without realizing when it happened. This is not cruelty. It is not manipulation in the obvious sense. It is simply how stillness behaves when it meets effort. Machiavelli would say nothing needs to be said. The outcome already tells the story. Until the next observation,